America at War continues. Here are Garrick Utley and Mary Alice Williams.
Good morning. We are continuing our coverage of events, the ongoing military activities in the Persian Gulf area. Operation Desert Shield has given way to Operation Desert Storm. The United States and its allies have launched a series of attacks on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait, attacks that have been met with virtually no resistance from the Iraqi Air Force. The attacks began about 7 o'clock last night, Eastern Time, 3 in the morning in the Persian Gulf. The Defense Department indicates that the Allied forces are prepared to continue the offensive for some days to come, but U.S. officials have told the UN Security Council that Iraq can avoid further punishment if it begins a complete unconditional withdrawal from Kuwait, but no sign of that happening yet. For its part, Iraq is accusing the United States and its allies of bombing densely populated residential areas. In a radio address, Saddam Hussein called President Bush a, quote, hypocritical criminal and threatened, in his words, to 2 blows for each blow directed against Iraq. Here at home, there have been some anti-war demonstrations in a number of American cities. Police in Washington arrested at least 5 people as pro- and anti-war demonstrators clashed near the White House. In New York City, more than 5,000 protesters demonstrated near the United Nations last night. Then they marched to Times Square for an even bigger demonstration. Early this morning, a sports car ran into a group of protesters staging a demonstration on the Brooklyn Bridge in New York. Police say at least 5 people were seriously injured in that. That's where we stand right now in what's happening in the Gulf and in this country. Now to Mary Alice.
And on the ground in the Middle East, we're finding a story that is riveting but very difficult to cover because of the restrictions, because it's very difficult to get any footage out. We do know that the first wave, or I should say we are being told that the first wave of military strikes that started about 9 hours ago were on target. The second wave is underway. And part of that is due to the efficacy of our weaponry, but also to the right stuff that our pilots have. The Department of Defense pool has provided us with a videotape of Captain Gettner Drummond, who's just landed.
It was pretty exciting as we crossed the border and we watched the ground fire coming up from Kuwait. We knew that we were out of their engagement envelopes, but nonetheless, watching the air bursts below us was sobering, nonetheless.
What did it look like?
Exactly like the movies, to be real honest. The ground fire of the artillery coming up and the air burst below us. It was exciting.
Wasn't that frightening as opposed to exciting?
Well, the fact that we're engaged in the mission and we're very much wrapped up with what we're doing with our jet, traveling right at the speed of sound. And that initially we watched the ground fire come up and the first response was, gee, that's neat. And then the second response is, it's aimed at me. And then it became very realistic. And that's when the maneuvers and the chaff clouds were put out to protect ourselves.
Did you have to fire any of your missiles last night? What happened?
We had no adversaries that ever came to engage us. Those that did get airborne for preservation went north out of our way.
You think that they hightailed it north because they just didn't want to mix it up with you guys?
I think it was a preservation move. If they stayed on the ground, they would have been bombed, and had they flown in our direction, they'd have been shot down. So it was their best move to go north.
What about? Did we get that last comment? Let me ask you that one more time because I missed that on the audio. Why do you think these Iraqi planes hightailed it north?
It was a preservation.
U.S. fighter pilot Captain Gettner Drummond, one of so many, the vast majority of young men there who have never witnessed a shot fired in anger. Now, the outbreak of the fighting has had quick and profound effects on the world's financial and commodity markets. The Tokyo Stock Exchange was open when word came of the first air attacks on Iraq. The Nikkei index jumped 1,000 points, an unusually large increase. Trading is now opened in Europe, and Roderick Pratt of CNBC joins us now from London. Roderick?
Good morning, Mary Alice. The European markets woke up with the benefit of that lead from Tokyo, and we're seeing the same gains on the markets here. In Germany, early trading seen gains of around 4%. That's in line with Tokyo. And that pattern's being mirrored here in London, where the principal indicator of share prices, that's the Financial Times 100 share index, is climbing as we speak. It's already up over 30 points. However, dealers do describe the markets as nervous ahead of any possible retaliation from the Iraqis. And basically, it's the same picture across all of Europe's equity markets so far. They've dropped between 10 and 30% since the Iraqis invaded Kuwait in August, and recently have seen very little trade. They've got plenty of ground to make up. And while equities go up, oil, gold, and the dollar are headed south. To put some figures on those movements, gold's lost over $20 an ounce already today. Now it's down to $381 here on London's bullion market. Oil, which initially surged on news of the Allied attack, has now fallen back to $5 less than it was being quoted before the air raids were launched. The dollar used, of course, to be described as the safe haven in times of war or crisis. It's certainly lost that title, as if we take from the indicators from the currency markets this morning. It shed 2 cents against the pound, for example, and it's faring much the same against Japan's yen and Germany's mark. It hardly needs to be said, but of course all this could change in a moment. During the Falklands, for example, the markets behave like yo-yos, reacting to each bit of war news. That's about how it looks here in London at the moment.
Roderick, President Bush ordered the Energy Department to begin drawing down the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. He did that in order to stabilize the oil markets. Do you think that's been successful so far?
I think so. We're also in the pre-war cabinet meetings here in London. They've been talking about petrol rationing, and the biggest attention so far is on the effects the war itself is going to have here in terms of security and in terms of our oil supplies. There's nervousness about any possible attack on Kuwait's oil fields, for example.
The members of the International Energy Agency adopted a plan just last Friday in advance of the predicted hostilities and agreed to make available, I believe it was 21.5 million barrels of oil a day. If they're able to sustain that, how long before the world's oil supply really does become effective?
I don't think there's any immediate worry about that, but as I say, all eyes are on exactly what kind of retaliation Iraq may launch and the damage to any Saudi oil fields. There were reports this morning of an attack which failed, but an attempt to send Scud missiles from Iraq onto Saudi's oil fields. That, of course, would have an immediate, extremely damaging effect and would almost make redundant the initial IEA plans.
All right, thank you very much, Roderick Pratt of NBC in London. Garrick?
Mary Alice, we're monitoring events in the Middle East. We have a couple of reports from Israel, for example, from Jerusalem. There has been some shots fired at the U.S. consulate located in Arab East Jerusalem. An AFP, that's the French agency, reporting that an assailant, unidentified, fired 3 shots at the U.S. consulate in Arab East Jerusalem Thursday following the airstrikes in Iraq. No casualties were caused, no damage caused, and the assailant got away. Also in Israel, the defense minister, Moshe Aarons, has commented on the events overnight, the war so far. He said Israel is greatly satisfied at the effectiveness of the strikes that were carried out, the fact that the Iraqis were not able to launch any of their missile attacks against Israel, which had been of high concern for everybody involved in this conflict. But the Israeli government, the Israeli officials said they are still concerned because Iraq has 40 mobile missile launchers, and they're worried that maybe those have survived and could still be used. So Israel is not out of the woods yet as far as Moshe Aarons, the defense minister there, is concerned. Let's go to Saudi Arabia, where Arthur Kent has been holding the fort, so to speak. It's been a long night for you, Arthur. I think we can all appreciate how tired and fatigued all of you must be, and that includes also the pilots who have been on these missions. We heard a short while ago that the airstrikes against Kuwait and Iraq have now been joined by French planes. I don't know if you got that report there, but the defense ministry in France said that a number of their planes have taken part in missions against targets in Kuwait. Where are the French operating from? Are they operating with the Americans and the British?
Well, it's a very significant development, Garrick, because going into this attack, going into this past week, the French government had been sitting on the fence, not quite indicating exactly where the command and control of its forces would go. Of course, many military analysts in the U.S. government were trying to persuade the French, come on, you're part of the 28-nation anti-Iraq coalition, but militarily speaking, we can only be effective if we have one chain of command and one overall commander, which typically is that commander of the dominant force here, Norman Schwarzkopf of the U.S. Now, certainly France has a 10,000-member ground team here on the front, interspersed actually in some very strategic territory with Arab forces. So now the news that France is going to cooperate and turn over its control in the event of war, which of course is broken out, to the U.S. commander is extremely good news. They're an effective force and one that will be very helpful. Significantly as well, two other countries which are representative of the smaller contingents to this 28-nation force, the Dutch government and that of Canada, have indicated that they too will take part in sweeps, aerial sweeps. The Dutch, of course, with their ships in the Gulf, and will put their ships and those Canadian F-18 Hornets under U.S. command. So a very much more potent force, a very much more unified force. Perhaps the worst news that Saddam Hussein could hear this morning is that this coalition is united behind that U.S. chain of command.
Arthur, from the very beginning, we've been hearing the questions about the critical importance and concerns about command and control. Now the hostilities, the bombing has started with all of these various air forces, American, Saudi, British, French, and even a tiny contingent from the Kuwaiti Air Force involved in these massive operations. Do we have any indication of how they are being coordinated or separated? That is, are they all together like a swarm of bees going after a target around Baghdad?
Excuse me, Garrett. We're even now watching the launch of some British Tornado jets, the distinctive maple leaf symbol on the tailplane of the British Royal Air Force Squadron flying here. You can see the aircraft swinging out to the west. They're going to be following the flight path north, and here comes its wingman.
We'll let them take off, Arthur. You watch them take off. We'll listen to the takeoff as they go off on these daylight missions.
You can see the long-range tanks under the wings. They'll be heading to make a delivery very shortly, again, in the locality of our colleague, Tom Aspel in Baghdad.
Well, Art, to follow up on this point, those British jets, when they go out, do they have their own sector of Iraq? Are they involved with American planes, or are the Americans given a certain target, a part of the country, the British a totally separate part of the country, the French another section of the country in order to keep them separated?
No, it's the type of aircraft, actually, Garrick, which would be the determining factor. All of the Air Force have to be coordinated under one single air command. Responsible in the end to Norman Schwarzkopf, the general in overall command. They have to be intermeshed perfectly, synchronized. They're working with all sorts of other forces. Of course, we heard about the guided missiles, the Tomahawks going in first, the electronic warfare planes, the stealth bombers. There are interceptors up there guiding them, guarding them, riding shotgun, as it were, over the bombing pattern. So all of these forces are joined together, and if we can believe the reports that are coming to us from the U.S. and from the Royal Air Force, it's working very well indeed. No casualties, no planes reported down as yet. And one very interesting piece of information that can help round out the picture we have of the kind of combat that's going on in the skies over Iraq and Kuwait. Our colleague, NBC News correspondent Gary Matsumoto, just an hour ago spoke to an F-15 pilot here at this very large air base in northeastern Saudi Arabia, who confirmed that he had been in aerial combat in a dogfight with an Iraqi MiG, and that he had come out on the winning side of that and shot that Iraqi plane down. So the first confirmation we have, Garrick, that there is actual air-to-air combat going on in support of these bombing raids.
Arthur Kent, thank you for that late report. As you say, is the first confirmation from an American pilot himself that there had been a dogfight, an Iraqi plane had been shot down. We had heard earlier in a pool report from another pilot that Iraqi jets had taken off and fled north for safety, that those pilots, those Iraqi planes, did not want to engage the American or the Allied forces in aerial combat, but obviously this one Iraqi pilot was prepared to do that. Well, that's the situation and the report from Arthur Kent in Saudi Arabia. Mary Alice?
In the Pentagon, the official conduit of information about the battle going on now, has had a bit of a lid on, but Bob Hager is standing by at the Pentagon. Bob Hager is also an aviation expert. Bob, let's talk about the aircraft deployed out there in the desert. I'm told that even without a cloud cover, they're flying so high that you can scarcely hear them or see them when they come in on bombing runs. Is that true?
That would be true, but that wouldn't go to the accuracy of their missions. They have all kinds of advanced technology, sophisticated heads-up sort of gear where they can watch their targets even through the cloud cover, through fog and all kinds of adverse weather conditions. So you could never completely rule out weather as a factor. I mean, it is always best to be able to see the target, but you can still operate and operate well even when you can't see the target.
Have you gotten any information there at the Pentagon about how the satellite scans are going?
No, nothing at all on that yet, but I would think that by this time commanders must have a pretty good idea. I don't think that it takes long to get the preliminary analysis from those pictures, so they must have a very good idea at this early stage of just how well they did yesterday, combining that with the early pilot reports, but of course the photos would be much more reliable than the pilot reports. I think it's important to say, though, that we're still in the very early stages, and while everybody around here said before most of them went home for a few hours sleep that they were very, very encouraged at the way this thing started off. As I say, we're in the early stages, and some of these pilots now, some of those recent interviews that we've heard, they at least are reporting that the Iraqis did react. They aren't a completely impotent force. The one pilot talked about getting a lot of anti-aircraft fire when he got over Baghdad, and the other fellow there just talked about the MiG scrambling up and engaging him in a dogfight. Saddam Hussein, there's no sign at all that he's apt to throw in the towel in the early stages of this thing. So we're in for many tough days here of air war, I would think.
What is your view of the significance of the French Air Force now being involved?
Oh, I think that's a very hopeful sign. I mean, we certainly, I noticed the absence of the mention of the French when at the briefing last night they told who was involved in the early raids, and they only gave the positive side and said the British and the Saudi Arabians and the Kuwaitis and the United States today engaged tonight in this joint effort. Well, the French were missing. So I think it's important from the American side that they're a part of it now. But there again, on that French report, they took fire. They said 12 French planes went out to attack an Iraqi Air Force base, and 4 of them were hit by Iraqi anti-aircraft fire. The initial reports didn't indicate that the aircraft were disabled, however.
All right, thank you, Robert Hager at the Pentagon. We're very quickly going to go back to Arthur Kent in Saudi Arabia. What have you got, Art?
Mary Alice, we've just heard from some officials here in Saudi Arabia, claims, and we're waiting for confirmation on them, that the only 2 major air bases in Kuwait have been knocked out. They would have been taken out by cratering bombs dropped by tornado aircraft, and in support of those aircraft flying this morning, Kuwaiti planes. But again, that would be a very strategic loss to Iraqi forces in Kuwait.
Is it safe to say, Art, that the second phase of this battle would not have been launched had they not had a pretty good idea of the success of the first strike?
You can see that a very highly synchronized, highly planned operation has taken place since the early hours of this morning. The entire atmosphere around those officials that we have been in contact with, and the airmen that we have seen in the visual reports coming back from the pools under Pentagon supervision, has been one of confidence. Clearly that they have adopted the doctrine which had been expected, that they would go in with overwhelming force and eliminate every and all hostile anti-aircraft and aerial asset that Saddam had to throw at the coalition forces.
All right, thank you very much. Art Kent in Saudi Arabia. And since the war began last night, much of the world has been glued to television. Some people are watching with even greater concerns. There are, of course, the families of American soldiers who are most interested in what's happening in the Gulf. At Fort Stewart, Georgia, with some military wives, is Kenley Jones.
Saddam Hussein.
Among those watching the president's speech were the wives of 2 members of the 24th Infantry Division, one of the American ground units in Saudi Arabia. Cindy Roth's husband is a tank company commander. The husband of Claire Blanchard is a battalion mechanic. I talked to them after the speech.
It was wonderful. It's what we wanted to hear. It sounds like our country's behind our husbands, and that's what's important to us right now. They needed to go in.
Yeah. I agree with Cindy. It's like he really didn't want to do this, but it had to be done. I know our guys over there wanted peace, but they're ready to get out of there too. So
The president said we have no choice. Is that what you think?
basically, yeah. And I think one last phone call would have been okay, but
One last phone call to Saddam Hussein, just to go the extra mile.
yeah, I don't think it would have hurt.
I noticed when he said at the top of his speech that no ground forces had been involved, that you clutched each other's hand. Was that a relief?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel sorry for all the others' wives, but, you know, as of now, it's nice to know our husbands aren't involved yet. You know, it gives us one more night of fairly decent sleep.
Is there sort of a sense of relief that finally something has started, even though I realize it's very dangerous, but I mean, was the waiting the hardest part?
The not knowing was the hardest part. When they were getting ready to leave, we didn't know when they were going to leave, and after they left, we didn't know when they were coming back. At least now there is light somewhere down there.
Yeah.
But still, we don't, you just don't know.
Right.
Just take one day at a time.
Kenley Jones, NBC News, Fort Stewart, Georgia.
Some pride, some anxiety, and definitely some mixed feelings from Fort Stewart, Georgia. Garrick?
Mary Alice, we've been following events here in the Persian Gulf, not just the military events, but also what is going to come out of this. And within Iraq, in that part of the world, there are more than Iraqis. There is the Kurdish nation. They don't have a country of their own, but they are a people apart, their own identity. And we want to talk a bit about what may happen to them. Talk with Hoshiar Zubari, who is in London this morning. Mr. Zubari is a spokesman for the Iraqi Kurdistan Front. Good morning, sir. What do you think?
Good morning.
What do you think is going to come out of this, as far as you, the Kurds, are concerned?
Well, I must say that we feel sad and sorry for the events to have reached this level. But at the same time, I have to say that this is all the doing of Saddam Hussein. As far as we are concerned, throughout this crisis, we have had a self-restraint policy. But we believe that as long as Saddam Hussein is in power, neither the Kurds or any other section of the Iraqi society will enjoy any peace or freedom.
Now, in the past, sir, Saddam Hussein had made promises of Kurdish independence. Then we know what happened. He used poison gas, chemical warfare against your people. What is the size, what is the state of the Kurdish people today in Iraq?
Well, the Kurds represent 4 million in Iraq, and they occupy north and northeastern part of the country. And we have been in constant conflict with the Iraqi central governments for a kind of regional autonomy and for democratic rights. Saddam Hussein has launched a genocidal campaign against our people. He has gassed us, he has deported us, he has uprooted us. Of course, we would be willing or wishing to see him go, in fact, and that we could also play a stabilizing role in Iraqi politics.
But sir,
we are not secessionists, as many people accuse us. In fact, our aims and objectives are within Iraqi United State.
When this war is over, do you think Iraq, even if Saddam Hussein is gone, will look like Iraq today? Will it be the same nation in terms of its boundaries, in terms of its government? Or is that
well, as far as we are concerned, it's very important, in fact, to preserve the Iraqi integrity and unity. We are not for dismembering Iraq, as far as we are concerned. This is our policy, which is agreed by all Kurdish parties who are allied in the front. But we want, in fact, a more decent, more democratic government being established in Iraq. And despite all this black picture which has been painted by many commentators, that Iraq will disintegrate, that Iraq will be dismembered, that the Kurds have their own secessionist intention, all these are not true as far as we know. I mean, I can't speak for the Kurdish Front, this is its official position.
Well, thank you very much, Hoshiar Zubari, for being with us this morning from London. I know you're going to plan some conferences there to see what you can do to improve the Kurdish condition in Iraq now that the war has started, and the Iraq that emerges from the war one day. We are going to continue with our all-night coverage of events in the Persian Gulf. The air attacks there continue. We'll be back after a brief break.
From Channel 4, this is a Gulf War News Extra.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sharon Puckett. American planes are continuing their second wave of attacks on Iraq, although they're not yet meeting any resistance. Operation Desert Shield became Operation Desert Storm just before 6 o'clock last night, Nashville time. American planes, along with others from Great Britain and Saudi Arabia, stormed into Baghdad, dropping bombs and other artillery. Officials are saying that the massive airstrikes by the U.S. and allied forces are taking a heavy toll on Saddam Hussein's military force. Although they've not yet confirmed the Iraqi targets hit during the strikes, U.S. military officials say possible targets include the Baghdad airport, Saddam Hussein's command center, and several chemical weapons facilities. Nuclear missile sites and weapons research centers were also possible targets. Several hours ago, Saddam Hussein appeared on Iraqi radio and TV, vowing to get even with President Bush for his satanic-like attack on Iraq. U.S. officials say the current wave of bombings will continue for several days before any ground troops will become involved in the fighting. No one likes war, and no one wanted to see the U.S. go to war against Iraq, but many feel it was something that had to be done. Tom Lee is in Washington. He talked to some of our congressmen last night and found them supportive of the president.
Well, I support the president's action. I voted for it in Congress last Saturday, but it still is amazing to think that our generation is involved in a war. War is something of history books. I was a little bit too young for Vietnam and way too young for Korea or World War II. So this is a conflict in our generation, and the consequences could be very terrible indeed.
This is not just some far-off occurrence. This is something that's real and is happening to my friends and to my neighbors. And so it's a very personal war, if you want to say.
They've never experienced warfare in Baghdad. They were able to avoid any really damage at all during that entire 8-year war. And it's going to be very interesting to see what the response is going to be from the people of Iraq concerning Saddam now that Baghdad has been damaged and many buildings destroyed, and whether they're going to have that same warm feeling for Saddam.
Reaction from other congressmen from Tennessee has been much the same. For most in Washington, now that the fighting has begun, the political infighting will end, and most everyone will rally around the troops and the president. We'll continue our local coverage of events in the Persian Gulf War in just a moment.
Imagine that the simplest book was just a collection of meaningless symbols. Imagine that you couldn't even count the change in your pocket. Imagine that you weren't sure of the number or names of the planets in our solar system. Imagine you didn't know the name of this man. Now, imagine life without education. And imagine that everyone was waiting for someone else to do something about it. Well, we're not waiting. In 1991, WSMV will report on the state of education in Tennessee. Where do we pass? Where do we fail? How do you pay for something that's priceless? A lineup of news series, public service messages, and special programs will put Tennessee's education system to the test, and we'll report the grade to you. Stand up for education. WSMV's 1991 look at learning for the family.
Some Tennessee guardsmen may have played a role in last night's initial attack against Iraq. One of the units from Knoxville, the 134th, is an air refueling unit, and Tennessee Guard Adjutant General Carl Wallace suspects it was in use this morning. Other units, including the 130th RAOC, an administrative unit, have moved closer to the front. For General Wallace, as for all of us, it's a difficult time.
And anytime that we have Tennesseans or Americans involved in an operation like this, that you just don't let it go by without a great deal of thought. I even said several prayers tonight that those of our own units from Tennessee would be taken care of. You know, and that's,
General Wallace has announced plans to retire, but he says he won't step down until the units sent to the Mideast are back home. Now for a check of our local weather. Currently Nashville, 41 degrees and cloudy. Stay tuned to Channel 4 for continuing coverage of the war in the Middle East. Our next update will be at 4:15.
From NBC News, America at War continues. Here are Garrick Utley and Mary Alice Williams.
And we are continuing our all-night coverage of events in the Persian Gulf, the war which is now raging between Allied forces and Iraq, the air strikes which are going on. These are some of the DoD pool footage, tapes, which we have been given, showing some of the missions taking off during the night. The attacks began around 7 p.m. Eastern Time last night, 3 a.m. in Baghdad. Successive waves of planes have continued to hit targets in Iraq and Kuwait since then. The Pentagon says the attacks have been successful. A senior general says the attacks will go on for a long, long time, several days at least. At the United Nations in New York, the American ambassador has told the Security Council that Iraq can end the bombing if it withdraws from Kuwait. Now, Iraqi President Saddam Hussein has shown no sign of withdrawing his forces from Kuwait. There has been no official confirmation of where Saddam is as of now. A message on Iraqi radio from Saddam today said the great showdown has begun. He called on the U.S. to withdraw its forces from the Gulf. America's allies in NATO say they hope the war in the Gulf will be brief. NATO ministers met in Brussels, Belgium in the early morning hours. British Prime Minister John Major says the first indications are that the Allied attack was very successful. He says he has not heard of any British casualties so far. In Israel, officials expressed hope that the attack has preempted Iraq's ability to attack Israeli targets. Civilians have been told to stay at home until further notice. There have been some anti-war protests in this country to note. We should also note a couple of other items we were just mentioning a moment ago from Saudi Arabia. There has been some military response from Saudi Arabia, from Iraq against Saudi Arabia. Iraqi artillery has begun attacking an oil refinery on the Gulf Coast in Saudi Arabia. That, according to various reports, including the BBC report from the Persian Gulf region. Also, as we reported a short while ago, as Arthur Kent told us, there has been at least one Iraqi plane shot down in a dogfight. That, according to an American pilot who was involved in that dogfight, so he certainly should know. That's where we stand at this moment in the ongoing conflict against Iraq. Mary Alice?
And Garrick, one man in the middle of the run-up to this war, all the last-ditch diplomatic maneuvering, was Secretary of State James Baker, who came back from his meeting with Iraqi Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz, effectively empty-handed. Lisa Myers is standing by at the State Department. Lisa, have we heard from the Secretary of State?
No, the Secretary of State, Mary Alice, went home a number of hours ago. The only people working in this building at this point is a task force, a crisis task force, which has really been on duty since Iraq invaded Kuwait in last August. Right now, the focus of the task force here is twofold. First of all, they are monitoring reactions around the world to both friends and foes, particularly the reactions of Arab nations. But more importantly tonight, they are keeping an eye for potential terrorist attacks. As you know, the State Department has warned repeatedly that if there was a war, the likelihood of terrorism would increase significantly. And as a precaution, the United States reduced diplomatic personnel and brought back dependents from embassies in the Middle East and North Africa. Tonight also in this building, their security is tighter than virtually anyone here could ever remember.
I'm wondering, Lisa, about terrorism. We obviously have been focusing on it somewhat over the last week. And is the State Department concerned that there are any Iraqi terrorist cells that have gotten out of the Middle East and are in Europe or perhaps America?
They are in fact concerned that there are terrorists, Iraqi terrorists, be they directly controlled by Iraq or sympathetic to Iraq, not only in the Middle East and Europe, but in Africa, in Asia, and in Latin America. They have had sightings of suspicious persons who have been casing U.S. installations, who have been casing areas where Americans congregate. What they see going on are preparations for possible terrorist attacks without any of these attacks actually being carried out yet, Mary Alice?
They have a dicey tightrope to walk there and not overreacting, I would think, in terms of terrorism. One thing that Saddam Hussein tried very hard to do was make this an Iraqi-U.S. conflict. He has not been able to do that yet. The effort, the first strike last night, was truly a multinational force. Saudis were involved. The British were involved with their Tornadoes, and also we now know that the French aircraft were involved. The government of Turkey will be asking its parliament within the next few hours to give authorization for U.S. military bases there to be used against Iraq if that need should arise. That would open the possibility of a war on two fronts on either side of Iraq, and also make it easier for refueling of the Allied attack aircraft. Ed Rabel is in London, where he has watched the tape of British Prime Minister John Majors and his reaction to the first strike.
British Prime Minister John Major emerged from 10 Downing Street to speak with reporters after following events throughout the night. He and President Bush had spoken frequently, he said, and he characterized last night's conversation with Mr. Bush.
Prime Minister, can you tell us a little bit about your conversation with President Bush before this began? What was the sort of mood of the discussion that you had with him, and what was the format that you agreed, the context in which you would all work?
No one enters into an operation of this scale or of this nature lightly. I've had a considerable number of conversations with President Bush about the possibility of us needing to use force at the end of the deadline over a considerable period of time. The final decision that we would use force if Iraq did not remove themselves from Kuwait was taken very shortly after the conclusion of the House of Commons debate on Tuesday.
Prime Minister, do you honestly believe that you've used force as a last resort and that there was no other way of getting Saddam Hussein out?
Yes, that has been our position for a long time. Of course, the United Nations resolution was set some time ago with a particular deadline, so that there was no doubt that in international law there was a proper authority to use force after the expiry of the deadline on the 15th. I don't think Saddam Hussein could have been in any doubt at all from what has been said over recent weeks that at the expiry of that there was authority to use force and that we would find it necessary to do so to expel him from Kuwait. I am myself satisfied that that was necessary, and I hope this will be a speedy and successful operation.
Prime Minister, do you have any assessment at this stage of how long military action might have to continue?
No, there can be no assessment of that at this stage. We have some preliminary assessments of the damage that has been done, but we will need a considerable degree of extra information before we can be precisely clear about that. Thus far, the assessments are that a considerable amount of damage has been done, but they are very preliminary assessments, and we will have a good deal more information later.
Let's hear about the attack, John.
I, of course, have known about the timing of the attack, as I said a few moments ago, from the consultations I had with President Bush at the conclusion of the House of Commons debate on Tuesday. I therefore was aware of the time the attack would take place.
How have you spent the night, and what...
Mary Alice, that of course was British Prime Minister John Major, who said that no British casualties had been incurred in the Gulf attack so far. There are about 70 British Tornado fighters in the Royal Air Force that took part in that initial attack, and so far Prime Minister John Major said there were no casualties. As he said also, he was telephoned by President Bush about an hour before hostilities in the Gulf began, and an open line with the White House was maintained throughout the night. He'd been meeting throughout the night with senior colleagues of his government. Leader of Britain's opposition Labour Party, Neil Kinnock, spoke shortly after the attacks began. He said he hoped the war would be short. There was some opposition in Britain before the war, and last night a few anti-war protesters demonstrated not far from 10 Downing Street. There's concern here this morning among British civilians that they might become victims of terrorist attacks. Iraqi hardliners have threatened to stage attacks here, and the elite special forces branch of the military has been ordered to go after terrorists. Britain's no stranger to terrorism, so it's tightened its security to an unprecedented level. There are armored cars and troops at both major international airports, and people are prepared for the worst. But
They're also relieved this morning that so far there have been no British casualties. Mary Alice?
All right, thank you very much. Ed Rabel in London. And now we go to Garrick Utley.
Thank you, Mary Alice. Continuing to follow the events and the airstrikes which are continuing in daylight in Saudi Arabia, from Saudi Arabia, from bases there, from American aircraft carriers deployed in the Persian Gulf and in the Red Sea against targets in Kuwait and Iraq. Let's go back to Arthur Kent, who is holding the fort there. Arthur, first of all, give us a weather report. What's it like there?
Garrick, the day began in an overcast way, and in fact, we were thinking here in northeastern Saudi Arabia that U.S. reconnaissance satellites and aircraft were going to have a difficult time surveying damage in Kuwait and Iraq if the overcast conditions extended over those two countries to the north. However, now the sky seems to be lifting. We're seeing quite a few patches of blue. It is certainly not hindering from our observation point the air activity here, because aircraft have been scrambling through the night and throughout the morning. We've had one interesting piece of news. It is in regard to the persistent reports of artillery shelling from Iraqi positions in southern Kuwait of the Saudi border town of Khafji. There is a report from our colleagues at the BBC, and the BBC has a couple of reporters with British military pools north of here, that some American ground forces have struck back in retaliation for that artillery. And we have no way to confirm this, but the BBC has gone on record as saying that U.S. Cobra helicopters, Harrier jets, and some of the A-10 tank busters, those odd-looking aircraft called the Hogs, which fly in very close and destroy armor as it sits on the battlefield, have actually crossed the line into Kuwait to retaliate for those Iraqi shellings.
Now, Arthur, let's be precise about that. According to these reports coming from the British military pool, these would be Army units, but these are not necessarily ground forces. We're talking about helicopters, close support aircraft, and the like. Is that correct?
Certainly. It sounds to me very much like a Marine force, Air Force A-10s operating from bases further south here. But it seems, if they are true, if these can be substantiated, and it will be some time, of course, before Pentagon briefings in Washington can give us an opportunity to ask if these events did in fact occur. But if these aircraft did cross the line, it is an instance of another level of warfare taking place today. Apart from the air battle, which has been mounted by the Air Force and naval air units, this would be very much the jump jets, the Harriers moving forward, helicopters, and close support aircraft.
Art, we've just had an urgent news dispatch from Baghdad. There are various aspects to the war. Part of it is the propaganda or the information, if you will. And the Iraqis are now coming out and claiming, according to their official sources, that Iraqi anti-aircraft units shot down 14 invading warplanes during the airstrikes overnight against Iraq. That is according to Baghdad Radio, the report that was given to the Iraqi people this morning. Of course, the word we get from our Defense Department officials and sources is that no planes are missing. Again, just to confirm that that's what you hear there too. Is that correct? Arthur?
It's very difficult to tell. You know, the French government has indicated that 4 of its 10 aircraft involved in the raids last night were hit by anti-aircraft fire. The Royal Air Force, British Air Force, and the U.S. government so far claiming that there were no aircraft lost. So it will very much be a case that we'll have to put these questions to the Pentagon briefers in Washington and those who come forward in Riyadh, the Saudi capital here, to find out what's happened.
Any indication as to when there may be another briefing at your end there at the headquarters in Saudi Arabia?
Not at all. I must say that we are operating somewhat in the dark here. The Pentagon has very clearly planned this in advance, wants this show to be revealed in a very deliberate fashion, a very measured way from Washington. We will get that information, which is made available to our Pentagon supervised pools in the field, and that amount of information which the Pentagon decides to release in Washington, and Very little more, only that which we can observe from our very limited positions here.
All right, Arthur Kent in Saudi Arabia. Thank you. Mary Alice.
All right, and Garrick, as you know, the Soviet Union has backed the multinational force against its former ally, but it is not a part of the multinational force. No Soviet planes, no troops, no ships are involved in this one. They're sitting back and watching. Nonetheless, President Mikhail Gorbachev is now speaking to his nation. He's addressing the nation, and as soon as we get a translation of that speech, we will bring it to you. Arthur Kent, a moment ago, was talking about the limited nature of information coming out of Saudi Arabia from the Pentagon because of the lid on information, the restrictions. That is also true at the Pentagon itself. There has been one briefing, a major briefing, by Colin Powell and the Secretary of Defense, Dick Cheney, and here's how that went.
Iraq and Kuwait. The targets being struck tonight are located throughout Iraq and Kuwait. Our focus is on the destruction of Saddam Hussein's offensive military capabilities, the very capabilities that he used to seize control of Kuwait and that make him a continuing threat to the nations of the Middle East. These are the same capabilities that now threaten American and Allied forces in the Gulf. Our goal, the same one we have maintained throughout Operation Desert Shield, is to liberate Kuwait and enforce the resolutions of the UN Security Council. This portion of the campaign, directed against Saddam Hussein's offensive military force, is an enormously complex undertaking. It involves all of the services of the United States military and hundreds of U.S. and Allied aircraft. It is an ongoing operation, and we must therefore limit the kind and the amount of information that we provide in these early stages. This obviously is different from what happened in Panama in December of 1989, where most of the operation was over by the morning of the first day. We understand your need for information about what will happen next, and we are well aware of our obligation to keep the American people informed. But you must also understand that we cannot talk about future operations without putting at risk the safety of those who will have to carry them out. I believe I can speak for all of us at the Pentagon tonight when I say that we had hoped to settle this matter peacefully. This has clearly been an agonizing decision for the President and the Congress of the United States. And we've reached the point of committing our forces to battle very reluctantly, only after the most careful consideration. But no one should doubt our ability and our resolve to carry out our mission and to achieve our objective. I have great confidence in the professionalism, the dedication, and the determination of the men and women of our armed forces. They are, without question, the finest young sailors, soldiers, airmen, and Marines this nation has ever sent in harm's way. I want to assure all Americans that we will do our very best to carry out the President's orders as quickly and efficiently as possible and at the lowest cost possible. We'd be happy to respond to a few questions.
General Powell, can you describe the Iraqi Air Force's resistance, if any, their losses so far, and to what extent do you think that you've already achieved air superiority there?
Well, the operation's only 2.5 hours old, so I'm not quite prepared to take on your second question. So far, there has been no air resistance.
Can you tell us if there's been any casualties so far?
We will, at the appropriate time, be releasing information on casualties. We're not prepared to release any specifics now. I will simply say that the preliminary reports we have received in terms of the success of the operation, and that includes the possibility of casualties, have been very, very encouraging. The operation appears to have gone very well.
What can you tell us about the Scud missiles that have been reportedly launched by Iraq?
There have been a number of reports of Scud missiles, but insofar as I am aware, they basically are false reports. General Powell, I want to say
a rundown on the types of aircrafts and numbers that were involved in the raids.
I really can't at this time because it is an ongoing operation. Let me just say that it involved the Air Forces mentioned by Secretary Cheney and sorties in the hundreds.
Can you tell us were there cruise missiles involved with that?
I won't comment on specific weaponry. It's an ongoing operation.
What targets were we bombing near Baghdad, and have we bombed any facilities where we think Saddam Hussein might be?
We have not been targeting Mr. Saddam Hussein. The purpose of our bombing facilities in the area of Baghdad is essentially to go after the command and control system of the Iraqi armed forces. And we're looking at principally military targets, command and control installations, air defense sites that could put our planes at risk, but they are militarily oriented targets.
Have you targeted any Iraq response of any kind?
The response of the Iraqi forces at this point has been limited, I think would be the best way to characterize it. But again, let me emphasize, as General Powell did, we're in the very early stages of this operation. It is likely to run for a long period of time. I realize you've all got legitimate questions about it, but there simply are things we do not know yet because it is an ongoing operation, because pilots are just now returning, and there'll be a lot of work required to assess the success of the initial efforts, and there will be a lot of follow-up work required as well.
Could you tell us, please, whether or not there have been any indications whatsoever that the Iraqi troops, the 540,000 Iraqi troops in the Kuwaiti theater, have been cut off from their command and control headquarters in Baghdad?
I wouldn't want to speculate on that at this point, Wolf.
What about, Mr. Secretary, can I follow up, please?
Sure.
Could I follow up? The President said this was strictly an air operation for the time being. When does the U.S. decide to send in the ground forces?
It is strictly an air operation for the time being, and I wouldn't want to speculate on the point at which additional forces might be engaged.
Have your targets tonight, did any Navy
planes? Murat said on the McNeil Lehrer News Hour this evening that we are, quote, now prisoners of our own country, in our own country. Now that we've defended ourselves from naked aggression in the Middle East, how do we defend ourselves here at home from terrorist attacks?
I'm confident that we can deal with the terrorist threat.
Have our targets thus far included tanks and artillery?
I don't want to get into specific target sets yet. As the information comes in and builds over time, and we can give it to you historically, we will give it out, but I'm not prepared to go into specific target sets and what targets have been hit and have not, because it really is just too early to give you that kind of bomb damage assessment.
Saddam Hussein says tomorrow, I give up, I'm sorry, I will withdraw from Kuwait. Will you pause to have a pause in your air campaign, or will you continue with it until you knock out all the priority targets?
I will do whatever the President of the United States directs us to do through the Secretary of Defense.
Secretary Cheney, from a military perspective, what went into your thinking in deciding to launch the attack at this point this evening? What were the factors?
Well, I think there were several factors. Of course, the President made the basic decision to commit the force. It was affected by, among other things, the expiration of the United Nations deadline that had been set on November 30th when the Security Council voted for the use of any means necessary to get him out. I think it was affected in part as a result of consultation with our allies, but it also was based upon the advice of our senior military commanders in terms of picking a time when conditions appeared to be most favorable for undertaking the operation. Let me emphasize, though, that the procedure we went through was to plan for execution of the operation at a point after the expiration of the United Nations deadline, but I had no authority to execute the plan until the President instructed me yesterday afternoon to do so, and it was at that point that we signed out the execute order with the qualifiers I mentioned in my opening statement.
Those favorable factors, can you tell us what some of those were?
I think I just leave it where it is.
Are you surprised that there was no response, or a very small response from the Iraqi forces at this point?
Again, I'm reluctant to characterize the response beyond what we've already said about it. We've not had an opportunity to debrief our pilots yet. Some of them are still flying missions, and I think it would be inappropriate at this point to convey the notion that somehow we've got a final fix on it. But I think it would be fair to say, and General Powell may well want to comment on this, that the initial reaction from the Iraqis is such that I'm generally of the opinion that we achieved a fairly high degree of tactical surprise.
Has there been Israel or Turkey?
on the part of Iraq?
None to my knowledge.
Mr. Secretary, could you tell us, the President mentioned that one of the objectives was to take out chemical and nuclear sites. Can you tell us in a general way if that mission was accomplished?
I can say that we have, in fact, gone after those targets. I do not yet have information on the effectiveness of those efforts.
Defense Secretary Dick Cheney holding a briefing for reporters in the early hours of the campaign, along with Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Colin Powell. We'll be back.
From NBC News, America at War continues. Here are Garrick Utley and Mary Alice Williams.
As we continue our overnight coverage of events in the Gulf, we want to talk with our correspondents at the Pentagon in Washington and also in Saudi Arabia to see where the next events may be taking place and how they may be taking place. Actually, the airstrikes continue in daylight against Iraq. Bob Hager is at the Pentagon. Bob, I imagine one of the most important things that's happening right now is getting the information from our reconnaissance satellites, which are overflying Iraq in terms of damage that was done last night. How does that work? Do the signals come back to the United States and then sent over to Saudi Arabia?
Yes, that happens, and they're subject to in-depth analysis here, but also over on that side, they get a look at them too, and so they can make some quick preliminary judgments over there. And I would imagine that that's happened long ago. We won't hear about it for some time, though, because there's no further briefing set here for, I would guess, and this is a guess, 5 or 6 hours.
I may be asking you more than you know, but usually you seem to know everything, so let me ask it. When the satellite goes over Iraq, obviously it can pick up the smallest item there or target on the ground, but does it take individual pictures of each of these military targets, which go from the eastern part of the country to the western part, or are there various satellites, or do they have separate cameras on the single satellite? How does it work?
Well, what I don't know is whether there are several satellites or not. I know that they can program the satellite to shoot within a particular grid. And so you wouldn't tell it to shoot this particular air base, but you'd give it the coordinates, and you inform the satellite to shoot this grid, and then you get that back and blow that picture up, and within that grid is the Air Force base, and they can keep blowing that up and getting it down to quite a small resolution.
Well, Bob, stand by there. Let's go to Arthur Kent in Saudi Arabia, who is going to be on the receiving end, or at least the pilots there on the receiving end of this very valuable information. Arthur, I suppose that these pictures are really telling the pilots during these daytime raids where they're supposed to go and what they're supposed to do. Is that correct? Arthur Kent, this is Garrick. Do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Garrick.
I was just following up. We're talking to Bob Hager at the Pentagon about the reconnaissance satellites. The photos are sent there. I guess these photos, once they are analyzed, interpreted, this is the valuable information the pilots need right now as they go off on these daylight missions to determine which targets to strike again.
Very much so, and at Command Control Headquarters in Riyadh, both for the Saudis and for U.S. forces, they're going to be taking a look at those and putting that information to work immediately with the bombing patterns set out today. And there's so much we don't know about the type of aircraft being used so far and where exactly they're striking. Obviously, a decision has to be made at what point, if at all, the B-52s, very heavy bombers, will be brought in, and against what targets will they be brought in. So it's going to be a matter, we would guess, of some time before we can see a pattern developing, which indicates that degree of damage which has been done in Iraq and the confidence reflected here.
Of course, Arthur, the B-52s, the Air Force doesn't want to bring those big bombers in until they're absolutely certain that they have air superiority there. And what we've been hearing, particularly in the last 2 hours, indeed what you have been reporting there on site in Saudi Arabia, is that there are various examples of resistance coming up, some from the Iraqi position. Some French planes have been hit. There has been at least one dogfight, correct?
That's right. I mean, the comment made by one American F-15 pilot here is at direct variance with what the Defense Secretary stated at his news conference last night. This could have, of course, been a dogfight which happened subsequent to that news conference. But I'm sure you will find that General Schwarzkopf and everyone involved in the operation here will not be taking for granted that Saddam's Air Force and his anti-aircraft assets are completely wiped out. until this operation is much further along.
And again, no indication when we're going to get any more information from military sources, either there or at the Pentagon. Is that correct?
No word as yet, Garrick.
Okay, Arthur Kent, you'll continue to stand by. It's been a long night. It'll be a long day for you and for many other people involved there. In fact, one tends to wonder how the pilots are able to keep it up. Some of them have gone out on one mission, come back to refuel, reload with ammunition, go off on a second mission. We'll continue our coverage of the Operation Desert Storm in a moment.
Well, the biggest thing I saw was one of the most fantastic fireworks demonstrations I've seen since 4th of July party years and years and years ago. This was tremendous. Baghdad was lit up like a Christmas tree.
This is a special edition of NBC News at Sunrise. America at War. Here are Garrick Utley and Mary Alice Williams.
Good morning and welcome to NBC News at Sunrise. We've been covering the events in the Persian Gulf, the ongoing conflict, confrontation, airstrikes there to bring you up to date on a number of the developments. The airstrikes are continuing. They are daytime strikes following the first nighttime raids overnight. We have not received any new official briefing either from American military sources in the Persian Gulf in Saudi Arabia at the headquarters there or from the Pentagon. We may be getting that come the morning here in the United States. As of now, the word is that no American planes have been lost in the raid. The British are saying the same thing about their planes. Some French Air Force planes have joined in strikes against positions in Kuwait.